Hello. Okay, so we actually have, I think, around 3 to 4 topics left. So if we maintain our pace, hopefully we'll be able to finish it by next week or maybe max next to next week. So there are just a few tiny topics which are left. So we'll try to finish off with generics today, and if possible, start with collections framework, or we'll do that tomorrow. So how many of you are actually using collection framework in your projects? Can you raise your hands? So if you are using some built-in classes like array list or stack or queue or something. Two, array list. Okay. So many of you are using array list. Anything apart from that? Anyone using a map or a set? Okay, a few of you. So we'll talk about that later. So right now we'll continue with the idea of generics that we were discussing last week. So the idea was to write a single generic function instead of writing multiple functions for multiple types. So mostly you use it for the scenarios where the functions for all the types, they are exactly the same. It's just that only the type differs. So as an example, if you could, so let me give you a brief about this code. So you have 3 classes, cat, dog, and car. They don't have anything inside them, but you can create their objects. Then array printer is the class which has your main function. So let's see what's there in the main first. So you are creating some arrays, cat array, dog array, cars array, each having 2 objects. And then you are also creating arrays of your 2 of the wrapper classes, integers and double, having 4 elements each. Now, what we have here are the functions for printing these arrays. So if you look at each print function here, can you see that they are exactly the same? Only what differs is the type. So if you look at the first function, it's working on an array of cat. So the data type is cat here. And then if you see it's an enhanced for loop, something like for each. Your cat is the variable which will iterate over cats, array cats, and it will print out every element one by one. Similarly, you have one for dog, one for car, one for integer, one for double. So we have 5 functions here. So how do we replace them with just one using the idea of generics? T, right? So we need to mention the type parameter here. So the moment you write in diamond braces T here, it makes it a generic function, right? At which place should I write T now inside this function? Wherever you see the data type, right? So wherever you see cat or wherever you see cats or wherever you see a cat with a small c, which of these should be replaced by T? Cats? So we should be careful here while converting it to a generic function. Where are the classes? So there are three things. So one is cat with a capital C, one is cat with a small c, one is cats. So there are three things. So which of these should be replaced by a T? What is the difference between these three? One is a class. One is a class. So this cat is a class which is a data type. Okay. Iterating in for each loop. Cat is the variable which is iterating in the for each loop. And what about cats? What is cats? So cats is here. For reference of the class. Reference of whatever you are passing it, right? You are passing an array to it. So whatever array you are passing from below, that is going to be copied into cats. So if you go down, you see what are you passing here? I haven't yet called this function, but when you call this, will pass these cats in there, right? So cats is the reference to your array, right? So now which of these should be replaced by a T? Only the type, right? What is type here? Here is the cat, right? So all we have to do is wherever you see cat, you replace it by T, and you have to do that inside your function definition also. So wherever you see a type, it has to be replaced by a T. So here is also cat, you need to replace it by a T. That's all. Right now you can get rid of all of your remaining functions. They are not needed. We just have one generic function. So should we change something else here? If you look at this code, technically it is all correct, right? But such a code is not appreciated. Why? If you look at your variable names, right, they're slightly misleading. It's a generic function. So you are saying it will take an array of some type, which we don't know what, but you are saying the name of that array is cats, right? That's probably not the right variable name here, although you can go with this. So better is to use a name like ARR. When you're passing in an array, it can be an array of any type. So it can also be an array of any type. So your array reference stands to ARR. What else? Similarly, variable that you are using to iterate over the array, you can better call it each. Right, like you do in Python for each in list. And let's also make it each. That's all. We got a generic function. And now you can go on and call this function on any of these array. So let's call it on cats, dogs, cars, and you can also call it on integers. So you should note that this array that you are making here, this array integers, this array that you look at these values 1, 2, 3, 4, they are not your primitive types. They are auto-boxed, and every value that you see here is an integer object, not a primitive integer. Print integers, and let's say I'm just printing everything here. Printing all arrays here with one generic function. Let's check. Right, so it prints your cat array here, dog array, car array. Cat comes 2 times. Did we call it 2 times? Yeah, so we want to do this only once. I think that's. Right, so all your arrays are printed with just one function. So let's try to do a few more things here, and then I'll give you a problem to try on your own. So let's say you want to return the first element. So till now we were printing all the elements. Now we just want a function which will not print the first element but return the first element. So that means that if let's say my function is something like first and I pass in cats here, since it returns the first cat, I put it in a print statement. It should show you the first cat. So the first cat's function here should return the very first cat. Similarly, you can apply it to all your arrays. So you can do it for all arrays just so that we can do it quickly. I'm considering, let's say, just true. Right? But you should be able to call this first function on every kind of array, be it cats, dogs, integers, or whatever. Right? So how do we do that? We should return the first element of the array. So we are yet to write the definition of the first function. Same, but you just have to put zero in there. We just have to put zero. So let's see what all needs to be changed. So I hope you understand why we are keeping these functions to be static. So that to call them, you can just directly call them from main. So you don't have to create an object of array printer. Okay, so the best way to write a generic function is you do it for any one type and then you can just replace that type with the t parameter. So let's say it was an integer array and you wanted to return the first integer. So what would the return type of this function be? What will be the return type? T. If it's a generic function, if you're writing it for integer, integer. Right now I'm writing it only for the integer data types. I'm going to pass in an integer array and what it will do is return the first integer of that array. So the return type is integer. Name of the function is first and you are passing it an integer array. I think the definition of this function is straightforward. What it's going to do? Return the first element of this array. That's all. I think that's all, right? Okay. Now, how do we convert it into a generic function? So it need not be integer, it's going to be t. So first of all, you specify that it's a generic function. Next, wherever you see integer, it should be replaced by t. So even your return type here is a type parameter. So I'm going to write a t over here and a t over here. That's all. I think we are done. So now you can call this first function for any data type. Let's check. Right, so it shows you the first cat and the first integer. Okay, let's write one more and then I'll give you an exercise. So let's say you want to write a function called swap, which is going to swap the first two elements of array, and it can be any type of array. Right, so you can start with the same strategy, write it down for an, let's say, an integer function, integer array, public static. What would be the return type? You are passing in the array and you are swapping the first two elements. So do you need to return anything? What do you think? Do you need to return anything? We are passing in the reference of the array, that's the address of the array. We are going to make changes to that array. And there's no need to return anything here. There's no output as such. So void and swap integer array if it is. What do you do inside? The logic for swapping. Comes with a temporary variable, right? Where you need to store. So now you see the type of the temporary variable is going to be integer here. If you are doing it for an integer array. So let's say integer TMP and let's store ARR 0 here. What next? Then I can say ARR 1. ARR 0 is same as ARR 1. What should be my last line? ARR of 0 is Or am I doing a mistake here? Your temp gets ARR 0, so first element or the zeroth element is stored in a temporary variable. Now you override that first element, right? So ARR 1 should be ARR 0. Is that correct? So what should be here? This is something all of you must know. It's first principles, having simple logic. And I hope I don't need to explain it. So you should be having TMP here, right? Okay. Now let's convert it into generic. So all you need to do, generic function T. And now wherever you see integer, you just need to replace that with the T. So this thing over here becomes a T. And this thing here should also become a T. So you have to be careful where all you are using data types in your functions. And yeah, let's check. So I'll come here and let's say swap the integers array and swap the cats array. And let me print these before and after swapping. That's all. So yeah. Fine. So your cats array was first is this address 2852. So it is swapped. Similarly, 1 and 2 your integer arrays. Okay, so now I'm going to give out this code to you and I want you to write a generic function to reverse an array. How do you reverse an array? And you should do it in place. What does that mean? What is an in place sorting algorithm? What is table sorting? What is in place sorting? Okay, the idea is you should not use any extra space. So whatever array is given to you, you should reverse it by shuffling the elements around or create a new array and copy paste the elements. So that's in place. Don't use any extra memory. You can use for loop, right? So what logic will you use for swapping? Sorry, for reversing. J will be upper, I will. Sorry? Swapping the elements and in what fashion? You can swap the elements to reverse the array, right? Now you should figure out what kind of swapping do you do, right? What kind of loop do you apply? So I'm going to put this code over here and you can giving you, it should be doable in 5 minutes. I'll give you 10 minutes. So you should create changes to this code and write a new function for, let's say, called reverse, which takes in an array of 25 and reverse. Print it before, after reverse. Have you can write it down with your
That's what it is. But from ask to be
That's true.
connected like this. What is up?
Mhm.
Ask you. What you changes. Like how we get it. But it's
One thing, it's probably plus. We cannot get talking. Right now, we are only talking about functions in there now. A focus is functional, creating a function. A function which can just like function over, but a function which can just one function which can take in any type of data. That's not the focus like one. After this, just instance of it. How it works. So function overloading is still you'll have to write multiple functions, but you can have just one function there as well. Here you don't have to write multiple. You can write just one function. And how? But yes, that is something we must mention. But we haven't here talked about packages like talking about. So giving a public clearly, any other class is it is in only the formula we need. This simple and answers. Let's use here. It's your and then you have some communications, make sure again and bring your. So there are some limitations of it.
abstract like
That one, that has nothing to do with it. Well, it's not all mystery voice that has to say. It's a that toughness can be so.
the responsibility of generating the knowledge. So
Rather, you can talk about the function being there. Let's say about how you make a generic function. You say it. But if you see the generic function, kind of get a that's that. Outside on another class and not in the same way. What we are learning are like small tools, and you need to see how do you put in these tools together. That might need some experimentation. Right? Generics and even inheritance. Try inheriting a generic class. What are the constraints? Those things. We'll talk about them. There are inbuilt generic classes. That's what entire collection framework is about. So we'll look at that tomorrow. It takes time to come up with it. Is there a problem with this? It takes a lot of time to start the mic.
that's happened.
Or this, I think the cell is weak, but there is no new cell. Okay, so I hope you figured that out. So it's going to be very similar to your swap function, but you'll have to put it in a loop. So what are you going to do? Swap the first element with the last. Then swap the second element with the second last, third element with the third last, and keep on doing it till you reach to the middle of your list. That's how you can reverse it. So you should carefully see how many extra variables should you use and how. Okay, we'll look at one more function which is going to be slightly more complex than these, which is, let's say you want to write a function called add. So you have to be very careful there. So the idea is you pass in any kind of list and it should be able to add all the elements in that list. So again, let's say if you were writing that for an integer, right? Since you are adding integers, the return type will also be an integer. Function name is add. Pass in an array of integer named as arr. Then maybe you can create a new integer called sum here, calling it s. Initialize it with 0. And then for integer each in this arr, what you can do is s equals to s plus each. If you want, you can also run a normal for loop here. For int I equals to 0, I less than arr dot length. And then you go on and return s. I'm not invoking this function right now. I'm just checking whether the code compiles correctly. So everything is so far. So it's a function which will add integer array. Now, what all do you need to keep in mind when converting it to a generic function, which can take in any kind of array? So here are certain restrictions which were not there in the previous cases. So first of all, make it generic. So add a t here. Change every integer to t. So you are going to return a t type after adding all elements. Take in a t array. This should also be t, and your iterator data type should also be t. Maybe there are some problems with this now. We have done exactly the same thing that we did with the other functions. We said you take in any type of array. You initialize sum as 0 and then you keep on adding the elements of the array. Well, let's try to compile this. And you start getting errors now. So it says, what are you doing here? Incompatible types. Int cannot be converted to t. You cannot do s equals to s plus each. So do you see what is wrong with this here?
That's a primitive.
So t here is going to be an object, right? No primitive. So it can be an object of an integer class, a double class. But the problem is it can also be an object of a cat class or a dog class. So what does it mean to say? So let's say you were invoking this function on cat. You were passing in an array of cats here. Do you expect such a function to work? So you see, if you were passing in an array of cats, something like this becomes here as cat s equals to 0. Does that mean anything? Are you getting my point? So whatever type array you pass here will become that. So if you are passing a cat, dog, or let's say some other kind of object here, you're literally saying that there is this cat object, you set it to 0, and that doesn't mean anything. 0 is an integer, right? You cannot set a cat or a dog to 0. You can only set numbers to 0. So first of all, such an add function, it has some limitations. It's not going to automatically work for all of your classes. It's only going to work for number classes. And you can add only numbers. You cannot blindly keep on adding any kind of object until and unless you have defined an operator like that. So we are not going to that level of details right now. But the point is, in this case, you have to bound this tree. It cannot be just any object. It has to be a number object. So you use a bounded type parameter here. How do you bound it? As we discussed before. So you can say t extends number. That means now if you try to call this function add on a cat or a dog array, it's going to give you a compile time error. You can call this on numbers. Okay, let's check again. If things are fine now, things still have issues. So it again says the same errors, incompatible types, int cannot be converted to t. So what's the problem now? So the problem is Java is a strongly typed language and you literally have no idea what is going to be this type T when you run this code. So this is also called type eraser. Type eraser means your compiler has right now no idea when you call this function what is going to be its type. All types are erased. So this T can be anything right now. Though any kind of a number class, a number wrapper class, but still any kind of a number. So it can be a double, it can be a byte, it can be a short. And maybe if T was double, you should write 0.0 here instead of 0. And you should not initialize at 0 because this 0 over here is an integer. You are not sure if any number can take this value of 0. So we need to make some changes to this function. So you cannot use directly t type parameter here. What you need to do, instead of returning a t here, what are we going to do? We are going to return a double here. So the other reason for that is when you are doing this s equals to s plus each. So you can argue here s was an integer. So s is going to be some time, right? And you are going to add each here. So let's say s was byte and each was also byte. The problem in Java is if you add byte and byte, you get an integer. So there are those kinds of issues here. So what do we do? We generalize this code, and since double is one such wrapper class which can accommodate all of them, instead of returning a t, I'm going to return a double here. And this t, it will be made a double s equals to 0.0. Now if we take over each element, and then you can add it to s. Another problem here is you might be adding a double to an integer here. Right, that is yet another problem. So if you are doing something like this in a code 89.9 plus 90, that is going to work. There is no problem with that. But when you come to wrapper classes, you cannot add the objects together. So if these 89.9 and 90, if this is a double object, it's an integer object, you cannot add them directly. So you need to convert this each to a double using this wrapper class function. Right, and let's check this now. Now you can use it. So, well, that was a lot of work, but that's one thing that generics provide you. You have to be careful while using them. You have to be careful about what type of data are you using. So if you are doing something like add, multiply, or divider numbers, it's always better to use double data for your types instead. So this was a slightly more involved example. I think the most involved that we will discuss. So right now, what we talked about was generic methods. That is the functions which can work with every kind of data. What you also have is generic classes, which Nagesh was talking about when talking about his project. So we'll quickly look at that example. Very much similar to your generic methods. Give you the same example as to what he was referring to. So let's say you're opening a pet shop and you have different kind of animals. You have cats, dogs, let's say dragons in your store. So you have classes here, cat, dog, dragon. Let me just, I'm just removing this. Just ignore this. Okay. So you have classes, cat, dog, and dragon. This is a class called pet. I'll also just remove all this. Okay. Now what we want to do is, let's say we want to create some new kind of classes which are box classes which can hold these animals. So you need some boxes for cats, some boxes for dogs, some boxes for dragons so that you can store them. So what are you going to do? So as an example, let's say you can have a class called cat box. Class cat box, what it's going to do, let's say it can have one cat. That's all. You can put in a cat in here. So how do you do that? You can have a variable called cat c here, and you can create your methods to set the value of c and to get the value of c. I hope that is clear. Right? So you can have something like, let's say void. Put means put a cat inside this box. And when you call this method, your this dot c becomes equals to c. Similarly, you can have another method called get, which takes the cat out of the box and gives you. So the return type will be cat there. Right? Now what you can do, you can create an object of type cat box and you can put a cat inside it. So how are you going to invoke this inside your main? So you can create a cat first of all. Let's say you create a new cat. Next, you can create a cat box. And then you can call the function cb dot put c. Take a look at this code first and let me know if you have any questions about this. And then we will continue further. So just open this code at your end. Just try to understand what's happening here and ask me if you have any questions. Then we will proceed further. Questions. So I'll repeat what is happening here. So you have few classes for animals, cat, dog, and dragon. what you are doing is trying to create some new classes which act as boxes for these classes. So what we created here as an example of a cat box. Now the point is you might want to have a dog box also. You might want to have a dragon box also. And you can imagine all kinds of animals. Maybe there are 100 kinds of animals in your shop. Then are you going to create 100 types of boxes here? So the problem is exactly the same that we were facing with functions. So do we write a separate class for everything? Cat box, a dog box, a spider box, so on and so forth. So what we want now is just like generic methods, we want to have a generic class. So you can go on and you see you can write an exactly same class, not exactly same, exactly similar class for a dog box. So you can say I have one more class which is going to be a box for a dog, and all that is going to change here is only the data type. Rest everything remains the same. So this becomes dog and this becomes dog. That's all. Rest of the things are exactly the same. So even if you create your 100 classes, all the classes will exactly be the same. What is only going to differ is the type of the data. So again, I'm going to use the idea of generics here. So just like you put a T in front of a function to declare that it's a generic method, you can do the same thing here. Write a T here. That means it's a generic class. Since it's a generic class, let me call it a generic box instead of a cat box. And then where all do you put T? Everywhere you see a cat. And because it need not be a cat, it can be any type of animal. So you put a T over here. You put a T over here and put a T over here. That's all. I think we are done. So you don't need to create all this. We just have one generic class, one generic box class, which can hold every kind of animal. Which will even work for your wrapper classes. If you want to box an integer, if you want to box a double, basically you can box any object here. Okay, let me just try to run this code. So we actually get an error here. It says I cannot find the symbol. So there is nothing like cat box now. We don't have a separate box for cat. We have a generic box. So you should be creating a generic box and then you should be putting a cat in and then getting it out. Okay, so we do not have any error, but we have sort of warnings here, which says that we are using unchecked or unsafe operation. So something is wrong here. So when you have generic classes, again, you have to be careful like generic methods. So what's happening in here? You have a new cat. You create a generic box here. Here you are not telling this box what kind of object you are going to put in. It's a generic box. So what happens is the moment you put in cat over here, by default assumes that it's an object. So it converts your cat into an object. So what you need to do is whenever you create a generic class, again in your diamond braces, you write here it's a generic box for what kind of object. So if you want a generic box for a cat here, you better write a cat here and a cat here. This one you can omit in the current versions of Java. So what you were saying is it's a generic box, but I'm going to build it for a cat right now. If you're going to build it for a dog, you write in a dog over here. If you build it for any other type, you write that. So we'll discuss this more with more examples, and then we'll talk of some more implicit classes in Java that are implicitly these generic classes and how do you use them. So I just want to check is that handle gone. So you see now those warnings are gone. It's no longer unsafe. So we'll talk more about